What's up, guys? Matthew here, and welcome back to Box Office and BAYGASMS, brought to you by Transcendent Films. Mitch.
Yo, what up, guys? Mitch here, also the Transcendent Films, and today we are talking about the Goliath in the film industry. We're going to be discussing the Harry Potter franchise. It is the highest-grossing film franchise to date. Star Wars is close behind it, about $1 billion behind. It'll be interesting to see how Rogue One, plays out, because it's going to be the great 8 versus 8 films who can make the most money.
Yeah,
Rogue One's going to have to make some pretty crazy figures to catch up, but they do have a pretty good chance because it's been making a lot of money so far.
Yeah, I think Rogue One definitely has a chance. But getting on, we're gonna go start with we're gonna do it in chronological order. We're gonna start on doing the first movie, and we're not gonna be talking about Fantastic Beasts while it's in this universe. It's not part of the series, so no, we're not talking about the movie. But to quickly touch on that, the movie is
I'm gonna throw out the figures for the series. So it's a $8 billion total box office franchise, $25 billion total merchandise franchise. So it's one of the biggest in existence. And I do want to start out, Matt. I don't want to get your favorite and least favorite Harry Potter film. For me, pretty much all of them are my favorites, except I do not like Goblet of Fire. I think it's whiny bullshit. But what about you? I know you hate the later ones because David Yates you're not a fan of. But
I'm not
your favorite?
My favorite movie is Order of the Phoenix. Now that is a David Yates one, I believe, right?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Yeah. And very closely followed by Prisoner of Azkaban, which is Alfonso Cuarón, I believe, directed that one. And I know you don't like Goblet of Fire, but I actually like that one. And we were talking about this for a little bit, and it's terrible for me to figure out which one is my least favorite, and that's between Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Half-Blood Prince. But yes. I decided on Half-Blood Prince because while they're both I
understand that
they're both pretty tacky movies, and they're very they have some tonal issues, and they're very bland and boring, and nothing ever happens in them. But Deathly Hallows Part 1 does a little bit better. There is a little bit
Deathly Hallows Part 1 is a far better movie if you compare it to Half-Blood Prince. I think I can agree with people if they think Half-Blood Prince is one of the worst. I think just because stylistically it is bizarre. A lot of weird changes, a lot of weird sequences, and it's it was a weird tonal shift because they're trying to shift into a very dark sort of storytelling.
Tonally and stylistically, I actually thought they were smart choices for that movie. My problem was the actual story, the fact that nothing happens. I mean, it's a bunch of garbage where he's just he's hanging out with Professor what's his nuts.
Well, there's a lot of filler because the only really important storyline that happens in this movie is the
Deathly Hallows, or not the Deathly Hallows.
Not Deathly Hallows. It's the relationships between Snape and Dumbledore, Harry Potter and Dumbledore, and Harry Potter and Snape. Is that sort of triangle of relationships? Because Dumbledore is doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes with Snape that he's not telling Harry, but it impacts Harry greatly. And Harry and Snape have never gotten along, and Harry and Dumbledore get really close. So there's this sort of triangle where they're not really telling each other everything, and they're not being completely honest, but they all need to sort of come together in this, for the greater good sort of thing. But that's the most important thing. But a lot of the rest of the storylines are not really that important. But they need to, fill the 2.5 hour or 2 hour and 20 minute, time slots. So they have a lot of the stuff that is in the books because people want it, but maybe not necessarily needs to translate well onto the screen, but they keep it in. So I can see why you wouldn't be a fan of it.
Yeah, I mean, there were some of the plot elements, some of the plot points in this movie are some of the best in the series. It's just the majority of the movie I don't like because I'm watching it, I'm bored out of my mind because I'm just let's get to this next plot point, and it's not driving you anywhere. And he did such, I think David Yates did such a bad job, and with those two movies and with Fantastic Beasts.
Of any director that I know, Matt is the most critical on David Yates of any director that I know of.
Oh, there's quite a few, but I mean, we just have been having so many conversations about Harry Potter, and I was just David Yates, he did 5 Harry Potter universe movies. So Jesus Christ, move on, go away. It's it's annoying. I mean, I think he did a very, very good job with Order of the Phoenix, and he did a very good job with Deathly Hallows Part 2, but not with any of the other ones, and there were still some problems with Deathly Hallows Part 2 in terms of pacing. The pacing in that movie is not the best in the world, but in terms of story and action and all that, it's pretty dang good. But yeah, everything else, no.
It's very hard for me to be super critical on it because, like I said, I really love these movies. I I love all of them, but I do think that these later films, like Half-Blood Prince and the two Deathly Hollow films, they're something that's hard to appreciate if you don't have like if you haven't read through a lot of the books or don't have like really appreciate the lore of it, because a lot of the stuff that happens in that is very like centered around the books, and it doesn't all necessarily transcribe well onto screen or translate well onto screen, because a lot of these plot elements are kind of minute, but there's a lot of bigger ones that are like not directly addressed but sort of like only addressed visually, or especially like that whole sequence that we were talking about earlier with or that you and I talked about before we started recording with um Snape and Lily laying, and we see
Mhm.
Petunia. That whole like there is a lot more story that's given in the book that isn't given in the
Mhm.
movie,
And
and it's all given through visuals.
I'm
And
not a book guy. I'll be honest. I'm not a book guy. I'm
yeah,
a
so
movie
like
guy. Like I don't read. Like I'll take people's word for it when they say that. Oh yeah, the books are fucking amazing. I'll take a word for it because like I've actually I tried to read Deathly Hollows, and most of what I read from it was actually pretty good. I got up to the point where Man Eye Moody gets killed. Spoiler alert: he dies.
he
But the
dies
movie,
pretty hard.
yeah, in he dies, and that's about as far as I actually got to in Deathly Hollows. But like honestly. I don't know. It's like the Harry Potter series for me is most of the time very hit, but there are some misses throughout the entire series.
Mhm.
There are some
Well, like,
misses.
and I
But
think the big misses
we
are in the later movies, because it gets very complicated, and there's a lot of exposition that they
there's
leave
a lot
out
of
in these
missed
movies.
opportunities
Yeah,
too.
there's a lot of expositions they just leave out in these movies because they can't fit it all in, and it leaves these kind of gaping holes in the story that like they try to connect with visuals, but it's like only something you'd understand if you've like really read the books, and like if you're just sort of like this viewer that just loves the movies and want to watch it, then it won't necessarily connect with you because like they leave a lot of it out, and I have no idea why. They probably just like, oh, we'll cut it, whatever. But there like ends up being very important stuff they just leave out.
Mhm.
So it always gets so confusing for me. So I understand why people are really critical on the last three movies, because like there's a lot of issues with them. Like I agree. Like there's a lot of left out things and a lot of things that are like not addressed. It doesn't make any sense.
Mhm. And we have to start off with talking about Sorcerer's Stone, and we're gonna get into that pretty quick here. So Sorcerer's Stone came out in 2001, and Mitch, how much money did it make?
The first one made a decent amount of money. It was $125 million budget, so a really big budget for the time, 2001, but it made just shy of a billion. So I mean, like this was a huge hit. Like it was a
Like,
box office smash.
what kind of figures? What, like 700, 800 million dollar?
How much it made?
Yeah.
It made just shy of a billion, just shy of a billion against a $125 million budget. So, I mean, it was a huge smash hit,
Jesus.
right out the gate, and it just that continued. Like the next one was a little smaller budget. Chamber of Secrets was 100 million. It made just shy of 900 million. I mean, like these movies, people came back in droves for them. Like they did well as it progressed. People were coming back, um, and it's just been a hit ever since. But the first one I think is very good at launching the series, and I think you
Mhm.
agree, Matt. Like it
Yeah.
has a certain like it's whimsical, and I think you even mentioned that you kind of get a feel like it's almost like the Goonies in a way. Like it has this
Yeah.
sort of
You know,
adventure.
I've never been a Goonies fan, so like my alternative to watching the Goonies is watching Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone because I feel like it gives like kind of a similar feel, but like hits all the right notes. It hits it better than the Goonies, and I actually like that movie is that you have very well developed characters because you're gonna be spending like this movie had to launch a franchise. And it had to do it very well, and it had to give you characters that you want to grow with them, and you want to like see them go somewhere, and it did a very good job of giving you that with the trio with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. If they didn't work, I mean, they were the first few things they had to tackle and they had to nail.
Yes.
If they didn't work, the series wasn't going to work. If you didn't like them,
Yeah.
you weren't going to like the movies, and it worked very, very well. They got a
Hmm.
very spectacular cast. I mean,
Yeah.
even
Daniel
Rupert Grint.
Radcliffe. Yeah, Daniel
Yeah.
Radcliffe and Rupert Grint have this really great likability right
Mhm.
off the bat. Like you can tell that they should be friends, and they have this great interactions, and you can tell that they're friends. And like I think Emma Watson as Hermione is a good tie-in, because like you can see why she would kind of, because she's like tries to be a hard ass, but she also has this sort of like this thrill for adventure as well. So she tries to act like she's not excited, but she's very excited all the time to be with them and going on adventures. And she's almost like the mom of the group. And I think it's like this great sort of dynamic between them that translated really well to the younger audience. I think
Mhm.
that's why it was such a huge hit. I
Mhm.
remember seeing it in the theaters for my brother's birthday, and I think I watched it like 3 or 4
I
times.
don't think I actually ever saw Sorcerer's Stone in theaters. Yeah, I mean that's
It was
that's one of the things I never saw it in theaters.
It's one of the first movies I remember seeing in theaters.
hmm I never saw this movie in theaters, but I saw it like later on, and like I think that's one of the reasons why I never caught on to the fact like why are people so like fucking like looking forward to this movie? Because I remember seeing uh Chamber of Secrets and Prisoner in Azkaban and all these other movies. Sorcerer's Stone is the only one I don't remember seeing in theaters at all. But like I loved it, and I had like for the longest time all I ever had it on was VHS. So like yeah, I loved the movie, and it was a great time to watch, but like it didn't like for the longest time I would even say like Chamber of Secrets was my favorite for like the longest time, and then
That's a
like
really good film. That's a really good movie.
that is a very good one, but like it started in as I got older and I started coming around a little bit more and understanding more about film, and like I started to notice like different things of what to look for, and I appreciate some of the movies a little bit more, and I appreciate some of them a little bit less. Like see Chamber of Secrets, while it isn't my favorite, it's definitely up there in one of the best. And
For sure, yeah.
yeah,
Like the one thing this movie did really well is that so they introduce, Voldemort in the first movie, sort of, vaguely, that he's there. And then they do a great job, I think, of building on that sort of fear in the second one because, we approach the first horror crux, which is the diary of Tom Riddle, which
and it
is like
gets darker in appropriate
yeah,
ways. This movie, as like it's trying to tackle these more adult, immature themes, it does it very perfectly. Like it progresses throughout the series, and it does it very, very well. I mean, they get a little bit darker, but they're also like they start off at this whimsical, very
yeah.
lighthearted kid kind of movie, and
And
it
the
progresses
great thing
that.
The great thing I love about it is though they have all these very dark adult themes, but they also have these sort of like shy, introverted teen boys that are trying to figure out also how to talk to girls and how to go on dates at the same time as like, oh, also we're trying to fight, one of the greatest threats to the world,
It's
Voldemort.
adventure.
But also how do I get this date to the dance? Or like how, so like I
It's
love that sort of
I have to say these movies are a adventure fantasy coming of age films. I mean that's essentially what they
yeah.
are.
Mhm.
I mean, and they do it very, very well, and I think that's what attracts people to them so well is that like its relatability aspect is that like they as they grow as movies go, there's something so easily to relate to is that like you're not coming back to the same age to the same problems with each movie is that they grow in terms of their story, in terms of their characters. It gets thematically much more mature. It gets it gets, I mean, even in the filmmaking aspect, it gets much more mature. I mean, they do a lot more complex things. They do a lot more beautiful things with the camera and the visual effects and special effects as the series progresses. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of the best series with doing that. I mean, I would easily say it's one of the best one of the best cinematic experiences ever, one of the
Yeah.
best film
It
franchises ever.
It looks really beautiful, and the score is another amazing one. I believe it was John Williams again that composed this film. Um, it's an amazing score. It's one of my favorites. Next to the Star Wars franchise, I think Star Wars is more iconic, but like this is a very iconic score.
Hmm
Um, the cinematography is great, and another great thing is like they use a lot of forced perspective in this movie. Like the actual castle that they go to is like I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like an eighth scale. It's like really really small, and that the way they film it is they force perspective, and that's how they make it look so big. But um, there's a lot of interesting things to do with these movies, especially at the start before they really get this more solid like CGI foundation.
hmm
Um, but I think like for me, the first three are great. Prisoner Azkaban is probably the best out of the first three. I think it's like it has the best like story progression. They introduce a lot of great characters, especially Sirius Black. I think that's a great storyline, because at the start Harry absolutely hates him, but then he finds out, oh, that's like my one last true family member, and he develops this great relationship with them, and I think it's just a great progression of that storyline. Um, and I did talk a lot of crap about Goblet of Fire. I think it's fine. I think there's a lot of cool stuff that happens in that movie, but I just hate because it gets really whiny for me
I think
because
I think it's
they hit,
perfect for that movie though. I mean, that's the age where like puberty hit. Is that like
yeah,
during
that's what I
between the
mean.
third one and that one, that's where puberty
Yeah,
really went into full force, and that's what I think works so
I
well
mean,
about Goblet of Fire. Is that
it
yeah,
makes sense.
it
It
makes
makes
sense.
sense. But I'm like, I hate watching it because like Ron's like, hey, well, you're the
But if
Triwizard
you
Tournament.
think about it though, that how long does that actually go on for? Like what, 30, 45 minutes? I mean, and then it's gone.
Yeah,
But
and
it
then
does
it's gone.
it comes
Yeah,
and it goes, but it like when it's on there, it makes sense and it's necessary that they had that. But like they tackle puberty in that movie, and that like that's one aspect of them. It's not like throughout the entire
I
movie
mean,
Harry and Ron did not talk at all. No, they have like this spat.
yeah,
It goes on for like a little bit of one act of the movie, and it makes sense that it was there, and then it
this
goes,
is
and then it kicks into full effect with everything else.
like if you
So
watch Prisoner of Azkaban to Goblet of Fire, like it gets very adult in Goblet of Fire. Like they start to have like these relationships. They deal with sex, puberty, death, like in a very intimate way. Because what's his face dies, Cedric Diggory
yeah,
dies at the end. So they deal with a lot of these like really dark things, like they death, and they deal with sex and puberty and relationships, and all these really adult themes come at them really
and
fast. So
if you actually think about it, death had not happened in these movies yet. In Prisoner of Azkaban, they would allude a lot to death. Like death is this looming thing, and it like yeah, it's happened. Characters die, and like in they have like that darker theme where they start. Okay, now we're gonna start talking about death and dealing with death in these movies, but
yeah,
not quite there yet. We're gonna start to talk about it, and then in the fourth movie, and it happens. A character
yeah, and
dies.
it's
They
very
don't
intimate
come
because
back.
it's very close. You know, it's very close to Harry, and it's very because Cedric Diggory is in that whole book. He's in the whole movie. You
Mhm,
know, Harry meets him. He's friends with them. They're sort of allies throughout the whole movie, and then
mhm.
you know, inadvertently,
And
you want he gets him killed. You know, like it isn't necessarily his fault, but I mean, just because Harry Potter exists is the reason Cedric Diggory dies. So like he
mhm.
has these feelings of
and
like
we and
this
we
is my fault. You know, yeah.
Right, and we keep talking about this movies as a whole, but we got to dial it back down. And all right, Mitch, I want to hear your final thoughts on Sorcerer's Stone, and what would you give it out of 10, and do you think it deserved the money that it made?
For me, it is a 10 out of 10. I love that movie. I watch it all the time. Um, I think it's a great film. I think it does a great job of introducing everything it needs to do, and it does it in this very like whimsical, sort of fun, lighthearted way.
Mhm.
So I think it's a 10 out of 10, and I think it deserves the money it made. Albeit it was a big surprise how much it ended up making, but I think it does deserve it. I think it does a very good job of introducing the series.
Mhm. I think for me, yeah, I really enjoy Sorcerer's Stone. It kicked off the series. It did it very, very well, but I don't actually understand the whole $1 billion aspect of it. Like for me, it's an 8 out of 10. Easy, it's an 8 out of 10 for me. It's a very good adventure. It's very good movies, very well done. But like I feel like there was so much hype built out around this movie, and that's why it made so much money as it did. And it for
Yeah,
me,
well,
it's about a 750 million dollar
it's because
gross movie.
it's because of the books. You know, the books had really started to like hit their stride like
Mhm.
worldwide. So like when they made this film, they really capitalized well on the craze of Harry Potter because like it just capitalized so well on that because it exploded right around the 2000s, like 2000s when it really started to blow up internationally. So they put this movie out just at the right time and capitalized on that craze so well. And then they just rode that wave out. So like they did it just at the right
And
time.
there were like some story in terms of filmmaking and storytelling aspects about these movies. Like Sorcerer's Stone, like, yeah, it's a really good movie. It's a good starting point, but it has some pacing issues. A lot of that movie is actually pretty slow. I mean, while you're seeing some
It's
cool
very
things going
slow,
on,
yeah.
but yeah, like as in terms of actual like meaningful things that actually happen in that movie, it's pretty dang slow
Yeah,
between
like
plot points.
in hindsight, when we're looking back on it after we've had the other ones, it's very slow. Um, but it is a hindrance to a degree because like it takes a long time to get through a lot of these like key plot points. Um, but I think that it may have just been an issue with like a lot of these were kid actors and this was their first movie and this was a huge movie and there could have been a lot of issues like that. But I think that in hindsight, yeah, there is a lot of issues with the pacing in this movie, but I still think it's a really great way to start the series. And then I think they capitalized really well on it in, you know, Chamber of Secrets. They brought another great movie. And really the issues just for me really come in with the last three, especially when they split the seventh movie into two or the seventh book into two movies, part one and part two.
Mhm.
Um, I think that was just for money. Because like if you look at it, they're like, oh no, we'll be able to tell a story way better this way. Like if you watch it, they don't really add much more of the story. It was just for money, purely
Mhm.
money. I think was the reason why they split that because like they didn't. The two of them could have been one movie easily,
Mhm.
and they
I think overall, no, I actually do kind of agree with that. I mean, with when it comes to Deathly Hollows, I mean, there are definitely some other movies that could have deserved a little bit more in them. That probably there was a ton more in the books. Like I think you said Half Blood Prince or Order of the Phoenix. Those two are like the longest books in the series. I think.
Half Blood Prince is the longest book. Yeah, if I remember correctly, Half Blood Prince is the longest book. because you learn a lot about Snape in that book.
Yeah,
Like they
and
cover
they
a lot of Snape's
and if you
backstory.
actually and we're gonna get on to talking about this movie in just a little bit, but we got to talk about Chamber of Secrets. We got to talk about Chamber of Secrets first. And this movie was, I think, I thought was very necessary, very good flow. It was very good build up from the first one, but it felt very much in the same vein. So there wasn't much really all that new, except that we were kind of maturing with the characters. It was still in that same vein of like the same amount of whimsical and like in same kind of movie magic in that sort of a sense. It was directed by the same guy too, so as the first one. So there wasn't too much new. It just kind of matured there a little bit more, just a little bit more, because it, yeah.
And I think they did a very good job of sort of ramping that up. They got, they did it. Like, I think it's a very good movie. Like, they introduced Tom Riddle, which is, it's Voldemort before he became Voldemort. It was Tom Riddle was who Voldemort was when he was at Hogwarts. They really, like, this is where you get a feel,
Yeah,
especially after we learn about Horcruxes, then this movie becomes a lot better because you're like, oh, this is when he made the Horcruxes. And they kind of like hint at it, but they don't really, show it. And there's a lot that happens in this movie that, like, once you progress through the story, then a lot of the stuff they did in that movie makes more sense to me. But I think it's a great job. They did a great job with it.
I never really thought about that. I mean, I was just thinking there for a second, like yeah, like you said, like this movie did a very good job with like a lot of the backstory of Tom Riddle's character, but that never really connected with me because I haven't really watched Chamber of Secrets in a long time. But yeah, you don't find out for about like 7 years or like 10 years or something like that what happened. But like yeah, this is where he created the first Horcrux, and like yeah, he murdered that girl, and like
Yeah.
that never for me, I don't know why that just now connected. Like I don't know, that
Mhm.
just now clicked, but. Yeah, I mean, this movie, I think, like, did a very good job of setting up more and more backstory and really getting us more introduced with all these characters and our main antagonists of the series. And it was maturing. But yeah, we gotta move on to talking about Prisoner of Azkaban because, like, as much of a good movie as this movie actually is, it didn't really bring more there. It's just a very good movie, but it
Yeah.
doesn't add that much to the
It
series.
was more of the same. The biggest thing for me in that movie was just the fact that they introduced Sirius Black. I think that's the most important development in that movie. Also, Peter Pettigrew, the fact that he was relevant, and
Mhm.
I think, and also Harry connects with Remus Lupin. Those relationships are pretty important later on. I think it was mostly just Harry learned a lot more about his dad and his dad's friends. Was really the
In
big take.
in this movie, I think is one of the best things about Prisoner of Azkaban. And Mitch, what would you actually rate Chamber of Secrets out of 10?
Chamber of Secrets is probably 9.5 or 10. Probably most of these movies are going to be around there. I'm pretty biased.
I give
Um,
that movie. I'm gonna give that movie an 8.5. I'm giving it an 8.5. Um, but yeah, with Prisoner of Azkaban, yeah, this movie for me, like this is easily one of my favorites of the series because it matures much more, but it starts delving into much more unique storytelling. This is an Alfonso Cuarón movie, and he's a fantastic storyteller. He's a fantastic director. He's made some really good movies out there. So like this movie for me hit all the right notes for me. It's easily my second favorite movie of the series, but
Yeah, and this is when it starts to sort of turn the dial up and it gets pretty dark, especially towards
yeah,
the end is when they really start to tackle with more of
yeah.
these darker themes.
Yeah, and it starts to. I wouldn't say that this movie is necessarily in that dark evil realm yet, but it's in that creepy kind of tone. It's like it adds
Yeah.
more scarier and creepier kind of tones into it, and yeah, you start to deal with more mature themes in this movie, but like it doesn't really hit that dark, that evil aspect until number 4. But Mitch, what were your standouts with Prisoner of Azkaban?
The biggest standouts for me in that movie was I thought like Harry had a good progression. He's starting to learn more, and like the big thing for him, I think, because this is where he learns. He learns the Patronus from Remus, and that becomes pretty pinnacle throughout the movies. But like, that also has some foreshadowing later on because um, a big thing with how like Harry and Snape sort of become friends is that Snape, we learn in the later movies, is his Patronus is a doe, which is the same as his mom. So like the Patronus plays a pretty pinnacle aspect. Just sort of, it's like it's a plot element. So I think that introduces that sort of magic, and I think that's very cool for me, especially later on. Also, like I said, Sirius Black. I think that's a very important storyline. Remus Lupin. Those are the big standouts for me. But I think that just one of the biggest drawbacks is that like there is just a lot of unnecessary filler. I feel like there's the whole scene with like the hippogriff that Harry learns how to ride, and like that doesn't really come back to serve him at all. It's sort of just like a fun little thing they added. But again, that was just something cool they could do with CGI probably.
Hmm. I really appreciate it. Like there are some very amazing shots and very like unique shots in Prisoner of Azkaban. Like when you see the Dementors like just free floating over like this fog hidden lake and like the castle and like how they use the camera in this movie and like the music and the tone of this movie is like it so perfectly flows together. I mean, it's such a very well made movie. It's such a well-rounded movie. It's such an amazing movie in my opinion. I mean, it definitely in terms of filmmaking aspect, it's probably the best one in the entire series, but not my favorite due to some certain reasons. They go we'll talk about in a little bit. But Mitch, what would you give Prisoner of Azkaban out of 10?
For me, I think it's 9 or 9.5. Um, I didn't enjoy it as much just because I thought there was a lot of things that didn't translate well onto screen. But I still think it's an all around. I think it's the best movie. Um, but coming from a different perspective, I think that there's certain things that they did leave out that they could have added. There is some like plot elements that they cut out. But I think from like the standpoint of like the actual like crafting of the film, I think it's the best one for sure.
Mhm. For me, it's a 9.5 easily. It's almost even a 10. Like there's very few things that keep this movie from being like a full 10 out of 10 for me, and that's because like as the movie starts facing into the third act, I mean, a few things kind of get repetitive and it starts to slow down a little bit. They take kind of a backseat when it comes to explaining some things, and it felt like this movie probably could have ended about 10-15 minutes earlier than it actually did. So it starts to bog down a little bit during the last part of the third act of the movie, for me. I mean, definitely some necessary things. I feel like it probably was handled better in the books, but in the movie, it bogs down just a little bit for me when it gets to that later part of the third act.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
Um,
Getting on to Goblet of Fire, Mitch. I know this one is your least favorite. I don't mind this movie that much. This movie is like a middle ground for me. I appreciate it a lot more than I used to. It used to be like one of my least favorite movies, but like I appreciate it a hell of a lot more now. I think one of the reasons why I appreciated it so much less is because of its thematical problems, like or not problems, but thematical uh is some of its themes in this movie is its storytelling aspect is like yeah like they're dealing with puberty in this movie, but they're also dealing with all these darker tones, and because like it's a necessary point in their life, it's a necessary movie to have. They have to show this. Some huge key parts happen in this movie that they needed to have, but like if you're seeing this movie for the first time at the age that we saw it at, I mean, yeah, it wasn't probably going to be your favorite because it was such a darker movie, much more mature movie. But it does have some issues in terms of its pacing. It does get a little bit slow in between
I
plot
think
points.
also the one thing is that I think it's the most interesting Harry Potter movie because of the introduction of the Triwizard Tournament, and you get a lot of interesting lore. I think there's a lot of interesting things that happen. You like Fleur Delacour, Victor Crumb, Cedric Diggory, all these participants. You get a lot of interesting lore. We see dragons
But
for the first time.
there's so
It
many
introduces
there's not enough exposition. There's so many
yeah.
inconsistencies with that though. It's like why are you having children fight to the death? I mean, what?
It's a Triwizard Tournament, Matt.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I understand it, but at the same
It's
time, like,
just
even
yeah.
before, like, here's the thing: at the end of the movie, they like a guy, one of the characters, he dies, and he's one of the candidates in or one of the
Participants.
one of the participants in the Triwizard Tournament. And he dies, and everybody's all shocked, and everybody's all surprised. He's in the Triwizard Tournament. The two acts of the movie, everybody was talking about like how it's dangerous. People
Everybody
die.
dies. Everybody
Yeah,
dies.
people die in this, and then if somebody dies, and it's just holy shit, somebody died.
Yeah, but the wrong person died. They're not supposed to die. Victor Crumb should have died, not a Hogwarts boy. But I think that I think it's interesting because it introduces very archaic and old tradition in the wizarding world that because this movie always feels like it's kind of new age. It feels like it's newer, like it's recent. But then they have a lot of these older archaic traditions, and there's a lot of humor in this movie that I do appreciate. I think Fred and George are great in this movie. This is when they really start to shine, and when they really kind of break out into these iconic roles that they have later on.
And this is for me. This is actually the movie where like they start to enhance that storyline and give more explanation behind what the Ministry of Magic actually does, and like you could see more characters actually show up and like be more involved in the movie and what their backstory is. Like and you learn more and more about
Barty
like
Crouch and Barty Crouch Jr.
yeah, and with Cornelius Fudge, and like it starts to focus on like what was going on like back when Voldemort was at large, and like what this sort of things that they were dealing with, and like yeah, there were people that like yeah they're friends now, but they were at each other's throats back then, and like it starts to bring you back there a little bit because like yeah like it puts you in that Harry's perspective. It's like he starts to see like holy shit, yeah, some shit was going on. I mean, we had no idea. And you start like getting these flashbacks and this more exposition, and then it happens and the guy is back and things just immediately get dark and it gets grim, but it does it so perfectly because like yeah, I mean in this one instance it went from yeah everything's peaceful and there's hope and everything, and then it gets shut off because he's back, somebody dies, and shit gets real.
Yeah, and I think the one interesting storyline is Igor Kakarov's storyline. He is the like I don't know if they call him the headmaster or whatever. He's like the guy in charge of Durmstrang University, which is one of the schools that come. And he used to be a Death Eater, and he used to be part of Voldemort's army. So he's this really evil, dark guy, and he plays a pivotal role. He's one of the few guys that like gives up a lot of these Voldemort sympathizers, to get out of jail. And I think that's a very interesting little
I
peek into
never
that
understood
backstory.
that. Is it like, yeah, I mean, yeah, he's the head of a school. Why are you putting the guy who probably killed quite a few
Because
people in charge of a school?
Durmstrang is like the polar opposite of like Hogwarts. Durmstrang is all about the dark arts anyway. It's like an evil school. They're about like dark magic. Like
I mean,
evil.
they never explained that though. They never got into that. I mean, that's the thing about the movie.
Don't.
It just felt like, yeah, they're just a school from another part of Europe. So if that's the case, then I want to hear more about that. Like they're more hardened. They're more like the Spartans. I would feel like
they're like evil Bulgarians, and they like dark magic is essentially like their whole thing. So like they're kind of polar opposites to Hogwarts. So like it's sort of this interesting like light versus dark, especially in that towards the end of the movie. But overall it's a good movie, but I just can't handle the whiny puberty, even though it's necessary.
yeah, I can understand that. I mean, so yeah, there are some thematical issues with this movie. Mitch, what would you give this movie out of 10?
9 out of 10 or 8.5. It's hard for me to like. I don't enjoy it, so it's hard for me to give it a very
like. Here's you didn't enjoy it. I mean that's kind of like a weird thing.
I love it. I still love it. I still love it.
Yeah, it's just like for me, like I enjoy it probably more than like I'm more willing probably to watch this movie than you, but I'm still gonna give it an 8 out of 10. Like
yeah.
Like you're a pretty biased man when it comes to Harry.
I'm a very biased man.
Let's be honest here. You're pretty biased, man.
You can't listen to me about it. Order of the Phoenix, I think, is one of the best ones, and we should talk about that one.
Yeah,
I think that is one of the best ones.
So, Order of the Phoenix is easily my favorite one of the series. I mean, like I had said earlier, Prisoner of Azkaban is the only one that comes second to it. But like Order of the Phoenix, like it deals with like so much more mature content, but like it deals with some of those grim themes in the way that I want it to. It's mature, but it's not like, oh, they have to like, oh, it's a brooding movie, so that means they have to literally color everything like a grayscale or like a dark green color.
Like some everything like the Ring or some grim. Shit.
And like literally all the expressions on everybody's faces just have to be like.
I think it's very interesting because like you have evil Professor Umbridge who now works at Hogwarts and everybody hates her.
This movie feels like for me deals with dark elements perfectly because like it feels like there's more emotion in it. Like the other movies, like it feels like all the emotion was sucked out of them. Like literally people became zombies because of how dark shit became, that they just got like they didn't like it didn't feel like they were dealing with depression. It just feels like emotion got sucked away from them, and there was a lot of emotion in this movie. Some shit goes down in this movie, and the kids are like the students are being depressed. Dumbledore's having to deal with some shit. I mean, Harry is getting judged and he's being hated.
Yeah, Cornelius Fudge and the Ministry of Magic does not believe him when he says that Voldemort's back. Nobody believes him. They think he's lying. He's gone crazy. They start the Order of the Phoenix, which I love when they start that. They use the removal requirement. I love that whole aspect, and they're learning how to defend themselves. And this is where Neville Longbottom's character really starts to come out and be this bigger sort of pivotal character. We see him in the first couple movies. He's pretty shy, introverted, clumsy. But this is when he really starts to become like a very crucial character, and he becomes one of the most important characters later on. So I really love that aspect of it. I think Umbridge is a great character.
Yeah, she for me, like she was a good foil for Voldemort. Well, she obviously, as you learn throughout the rest of these movies, she does
It's
have
pretty
some
mean.
corruption. She's pretty corrupt, and she does have some shit going on in the background. But during this movie, like, she's a good foil because she's not exactly an evil person. She's just very corrupt, and she just shows you how just bad you can be just for being a good person. And like, I feel like that's a good example for Harry and Hermione's characters, like how they have to develop and how they have to deal with certain things that they can't be in Umbridge. They can't be ultimate controlling and all that just to maintain order because they're filled with so much fear. And they go over that whole aspect of fear is that, like, that's why Fudge and Umbridge are doing things and being so corrupt and being so controlling nowadays, because they are so afraid of Voldemort and things becoming bad that they don't want to lose
Yeah.
like so much. Because like, I think it's like one of my favorite lines from the movie is like I think it was Lupin said, or Sirius, one of them said that, like, because like last time, we almost lost almost everything that we hold dearest or something like that. And that's like one of my favorite
Yeah.
lines in movie history is like, I mean, like how well that expresses like how dire the situation is, but how
Hmm.
subtle that line is.
Yes,
So
very
yeah, I
much so.
mean, it's and
And
like how this movie actually starts, the cinematography, like the very first shots of this movie, I mean, just fit the tone perfectly. I mean, it's at a playground, a place of peace and happiness, but like there's dark clouds,
and then the
the grass
Dementor
is
strikes.
dead.
Yeah.
Harry's just sitting there and he's just like kind of just, kicking the grass a little bit. He's just kind of sitting there, and Dudley's just beating up on this kid along with his friends. It's like they're doing this in a playground, and it shows you of what was great and how it became dark. And I think that
Yeah.
does a very good job of setting up. That's a very good like foreshadowing and a very good metaphor
Yes.
for what this movie is and what these movies are becoming.
And also, one of the most important things in this movie is the sort of relationship that Snape and Harry start to form, because Harry's having these very dark and vivid nightmares. And it's actually, since Harry, I don't know, this is a pretty big spoiler, but Harry is a Horcrux of Voldemort. So him and Voldemort are intimately connected by the mind. So um, Voldemort can permeate his mind, and so like especially when Voldemort's at his weakest, their minds kind of link and they share these visuals. So Harry's having these very like realistic nightmares and these sort of attacks, and he can't do it anymore, and he needs to learn how to defend against them. So Snape is going to teach him how to defend,
Isn't it
and
called
it's
like occlumency? Is that in it?
I can't remember the name, but it's something along those lines. And it's interesting because Harry and Snape never got along. They've been kind of polar opposites, but now they have to come together, and it doesn't go so great because Snape is kind of a douche and Harry is also kind of a douche. So they come together and they be big douchebags, and they don't really want to work with each other. And we also start to learn a lot more about Snape and sort of
There is
his
one
backstory.
There, Mitch, maybe you know a little bit more about this, but like there is one flaw that I have with the movie where I was very confused. It's like when after Snape and Harry start doing these lessons and start doing this, it kind of like it goes like it looks like it was past like the next day, and then like about 30 minutes of the movie, it looks like it's just passing normal time, and then all of a sudden at the end of one scene, it like cuts back into this weird drawback and like this lesson, like one of these lessons where like Snape is teaching him how to defend himself because he has to literally go into his mind and search
Yeah.
all of his memories. So I never understood. It's like, wait, did we just watch like a period of time that happened before where we were about an hour ago, or is this happening later and it kind of transitioned weird? Like, do you
So
know what I'm talking about?
you're talking about like when they're doing the actual lessons, and it like all of a sudden it jumps forward in like time, it seems like almost.
Yeah, and like there's like a period of the movie where it looks like, oh, he just was doing these lessons, and it looks like it's cutting in between, and then like there's like this one scene, and I think it's like the Christmas scene where like they're at like the Weasley's house or the Order of the Phoenix apartment or wherever that is at, and then it cuts weird and it transitions back into that scene where like Snape is sifting through his memories, and like I never understood. It's like, wait, was that entire period of time between now and that last lesson that we saw? Was that just like all it was just a giant flashback? And like now
Yeah.
we're coming back because I never understood, because I was just like,
Yes.
wait, we just watched a period of time in the movie that happened before? Like, I'm confused. And I still think that, I mean, that's my only issue with the movie, but I think still, like, in terms of story and its themes, it works very, very well. But it does everything else very well. It's just that's one inconsistency with the movie and a
And it,
stylistic choice of David Yates, which typically have a lot of problems with them.
yeah, he takes a lot of interesting stylistic choices, and that was just a very long and overdrawn flashback, sort of strange. Because this is when he starts to get into his like, I'm David Yates, and I'm going to be weird with my choices sometimes. Like, there wasn't much in the Order of the Phoenix, but it really starts to come out in the Half Blood Prince. But I really like that because we learn a lot about Snape in this movie, and it ramps up towards the Half Blood Prince, where we really start to delve into Snape's backstory, especially in the books. But like you learn why Snape is a dick towards Harry because like him and Harry's dad never got along. They were pretty much mortal enemies. So like he just sort of has this like he doesn't like Harry's dad. He doesn't like Harry, but he fucking loves his mom. Like, like that's his girl, So like it's this very interesting sort of like
Mhm,
juxtaposition of characters that I really like. And they do a pretty good job of portraying that in this movie, especially like when they start to ramp up towards that,
mhm.
that pivotal moment in the second part of Deathly Hollows.
Yeah. Okay. And Mitch, what would you rate Order of the Phoenix?
This is a 10 out of 10. I think this is the best movie all around. I think it does a good job of catching all the right themes.
Mhm.
I think the arcs are good. The pacing is very good. It doesn't. I mean, it's pretty. It's kind of balls to the wall the whole time, and I think it does a pretty good job.
I think that overall as a film, I mean, for me as an experience and all the things it went over, I mean, it did it so well and it was very effective. There's some issues here and there with the movie. I mean, overall as a well-made film, I think Prisoner of Azkaban is better, but in terms of what we're dealing with in the story and the tone of and how effective it was when it was effective, for me, it's a 9.5 out of 10. I mean, this is one of my favorite movies of all time. I mean, easily. I mean, this is one of the reasons that reminds me of why I love Harry Potter and why
And I
I
think
love
that
these movies.
the interesting contrast to make is that this was actually one of the movies that was the critics were most harsh on, um, and they
I mean,
liked it the
easily because
least.
I mean, this movie was such a departure. I mean, the
Yeah.
majority of Goblet of Fire was a very like it was a very kid and teenage. It wasn't until like the last few minutes of the last act that it get really really dark. This movie consistently throughout it is very dark, and it's like it has matured a lot more.
Mhm.
He's now a 16-year-old or something about that age, and yeah, I mean, he's past the puberty point. I mean, he's still in puberty, but like they don't tackle that anymore like they
Yeah.
did. It's like in Harry Potter world,
It
puberty
is.
lasts a year. It lasts a
It
year,
is.
and
It is a
then you're
major.
good.
It is a major departure from,
Mhm.
the previous four movies, and it needed to happen then because the next three movies are probably the darkest. Like they're dark movies. They tackle a lot of
Mhm.
very adult elements. So it was important to get that departure. Started at the end of four, and then really just take it.
Easily, I would have to say is that these next three movies are some of the darkest big blockbuster movies of all time because blockbuster movies are easily are the most money making. They're the most loved. They're like their audience, their demographic is so wide. And the fact that these movies, as dark as they are made as much money as they do, because normally movies like this don't make that much money when they're dealing with themes and like dealing with story that like is as dark and mature as these movies did.
Hmm.
I mean, I think that that's a huge accomplishment of them, but like again, I do have some few flaws with these final three, with a few of these final three movies. So
Yeah.
Mitch, Half Blood Prince, give me the rundown.
Half Blood Prince. So I think this is one of their biggest falters in the series, just in the sense that like a lot happens in Half Blood Prince. A lot of stuff happens that sets up Deathly Hollows. Like there is a lot of backstory, especially with Snape, and especially with like Horcruxes, and there's a lot of stuff that they just neglect to show in this movie. Like there's a whole sequence where like so in this movie we see that Dumbledore has a ring and he's like, or you see the remnants. He's destroyed a ring on his hand, and that's why his hand's all messed up. They don't explain any of that, but she spends like 200 pages going through the backstory of the ring. It's Tom Riddle's mom's ring. Dumbledore, like, there's so much that they leave out, and it's pretty crucial. And this is why I don't understand. Um, there's just so much left out, like I've been saying, and it's not a great film because it leaves you sort of confused because
Yeah,
they give
and
you
it
they give you just enough so you could understand, but not a lot, and they leave out so much exposition.
yeah, I mean that's one of the problems with this movie. Is like it went from the departure that I loved. It went with one of the mature themes, like how they handled the mature themes in Order of the Phoenix was perfect. And then they went to this, all of a sudden now it's everything's dark. Like literally clouds are like a greenish color. And the tone, the color correction, the color grading of the actual movie itself done in editing, like literally everything is just dark. And like all the characters are very like not so much like lively anymore. They're all like very emotionless and dead inside. And like I mean, yeah, there are some parts where you definitely do see some emotion, some variation in the characters, like with Hermione. But like when it comes to Harry and some of these other characters, it's not as lively. It doesn't feel like, yeah, it's a school, yeah, we like sports.
It's like, oh no, we're all screwed, and Voldemort's here, and we're all gonna die.
Mean, to an extent, you like that. That makes sense. Like overall, like that's necessary. That should happen. But at least our characters, when we dial down into them, we should see their emotions come out a little bit more. And I feel like it was a little bit dead throughout this movie. It came back. I feel like it came back a little bit in the next two movies. Like the characters started being more lively, but this movie just felt like very emotionless and bland throughout the entirety of it. It was very confusing.
And there's huge issues with it because like if you just watch these movies, the last three, or you watch all of them, these last three, if you just watch the movies, didn't read the books, I can understand the amount of confusion that it would cause, because like they do the bare like necessity in explaining like Horcruxes and where they come from. They just enough so you can be like, okay, so you kill somebody and it splits your soul. Like they do the bare necessity in explaining all of that, and it just ends up being a huge disservice to these films because like it becomes very convoluted and it's hard to follow.
It does become convoluted because then you would think like, wait, so all it takes is if you just kill somebody, like, yeah, you get a Horcrux. So like then technically shouldn't like a few billion people be like have Horcruxes? Because
it's very special magic you have to do, and they explain it in the books, but they don't explain it at all in the movies.
Yeah, and that's the point. And that's the point that I'm trying to make is that like they don't explain much behind the backstory of what the heck these things are that much in these movies. It's just like, oh, if you kill, it splits your soul, and then you hide it in an object.
And then by the way, Harry is the Horcrux, so he can die and then come back and be fine.
And that's the thing is that like when it started explaining a little bit more, like I feel like there were certain notes that should have hit a little bit more. Especially what's the name of the professor that Jim Broadbent plays in this movie? The one that Tom Riddle hangs out with.
And oh god damn it! And they have to convince him to come, and he turns into a chair. Remember that?
Yeah, Horn.
Horn, yeah. I'll look it up. I can't remember. You keep talking. I'll look it up.
Yeah, so Jim Broadbent, his character in the movie, famous British actor Jim Broadbent. But essentially, there's a scene.
He's really great in this movie.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's one of my favorite. Like whenever he's one of those actors, like he's not one of my favorites, but whenever I see him show up in a movie, I'm always like, yes, they got him because he's good. He's that good. But like there's like I was saying, there's a scene that happens in the movie where Tom Riddle's talking about Horcruxes, and he's just like, it's so dire, like the way that Jim Broadbent's character explains Horcruxes, it's such a dire thing. It doesn't hit there, but it almost hits there. They just needed some more exposition on it, and then Tom Riddle's just sitting there like, well, what if I make 7? And then like he's just like, then like he starts freaking out. It's like obviously it sounds like such a bad thing that like they're making Horcruxes, but they never really develop on like why it's so bad. Like you kill somebody, but there's already been some characters that have already died and they weren't killed by anybody with Horcruxes. Like we've already seen that in these movies.
His name is Horace Slughorn.
Slughorn. Yeah. Horace Slughorn. And like it just didn't hit like that. It didn't hit that exposition enough that we needed to really give that impact of it. And like, holy shit, you're making 7 of them. And like understanding like holy shit, somebody made like Tom Riddle not only made 1, but he made 7 of them. And it's just like, holy shit, like he went to the excessive amount. And like you don't really understand the aspect of that in terms of this movie. Like throughout the rest of the movies, they start to explain a little bit more about the Horcruxes. There's a little bit more exposition given on them throughout like 7 and 8, and it gets a little bit better. But in terms of the movie, where they had to set all that up, they didn't do a good job. And I feel like this movie was a huge step back for me. I'd probably, I'd give it probably a 7. No, 6.5. 6.5 or a 7 out of 10. I mean, for me, this movie was a huge disappointment. And Mitch will be back in just a sec. So Mitch, I gave this movie.
I received an important phone call. Sorry about that.
I gave Mitch, I gave this movie a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10.
For Half-Blood Prince.
Yeah, Half Blood
Um,
Prince. What would you
I
give it?
think it's 7.5 out of 8. I still enjoy watching it.
Out of 8?
Um, 7.5 or 8 out of 10. Okay, so I still enjoy watching it. But it's, again, like we've said, you need to read the books, or at least like, because if you don't understand it or are confused about all these things, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages where they explain why Voldemort and why Voldemort has Horcruxes, why Dumbledore is chasing them, what they are, how they link up. All this stuff is explained, and they do the bare minimum. And I think it's because it would have been, they would have had to make like a two-part two movies for Half-Blood Prince, and
And I mean, I understand, like, if they would have had to make more movies, like, just to explain things better, like, we don't know necessarily what would have been the best case, because I do recognize there's something wrong with these last 3 movies. There definitely is, in terms of its pacing and exposition, is that they leave so much out of it, and, like, there's a lot of, like, wait, what's going on? I'm confused. Wait, what's happening? And they don't really get back to the roots of really just doing things efficiently until the 8th movie. Like 7 and 6 had such big issues with explaining stuff in them. And I remember, like, my dad and I went to go see 7, and he was confused and I was confused, and we were just like, I remember my dad saying that, like, he had said that this isn't what he liked about the Harry Potter movies, like, because
exactly, yeah.
my parents, like, their favorite ones are the earlier ones that are much more lighthearted. And I think for a lot of audience members, like, they didn't do a good job at setting up the more mature tones throughout these last few movies, that it lost some of
But
its
like,
audience in a sense.
honestly, watching the seventh movies, or part 1 and part 2, for the person that hasn't read the books, I don't understand how you could really understand exactly what is going on without, just based off the 6th movie, because I could see how you could have, like, maybe like a vague understanding of what's going on, but like I kind of express how much of it is left out, that you could just be like, yeah, I guess I understand, like, his hand is fucked up and that's killing him, but like, there's a lot of things that he does to destroy that ring, and he goes through like months and months and months of figuring out spells to destroy it. And the reason why he's dying, why his hand is, slowly killing him, is because the spells he had to use to destroy it, it's a byproduct. Like, he has to wear it to destroy it, and that's also going to kill him when he destroys it. And so he's going to die regardless. But like, so there's all these things that they leave out. So it's a huge disservice. So when we get into the 7th movies, people are like, if you read the books, you understand what's going on. If you didn't, then you're like, Horcruxes or what? There's something, and Harry's one, and like, I can see how you're like, what's going on? I'm so confused. And but I think there is some great parts in the 7th, or the part 1 and part 2. I think, like, I was really sad because, I mean, I knew it was coming, but like, the way that Dobby died in this movie is very sad, I think, especially in the books. Like, I don't know if you like his character that much, Matt, but
I loved his character. I remember my mom, Dobby fucking
yeah, wasn't
drove
she
her nuts.
happy? Yeah, wasn't she happy when he died or something?
Yeah, my mom did not like Dobby at all. I mean, one of the reasons why she hates him so much is his name. She can't figure out how to pronounce his name because it's so stupid. Like, it's
Dobby.
it's Dobby, and she's just like, Dobby, Dobby, Dobby,
Dobby.
and like, she understands how to pronounce it a little bit, but it drives her nuts because of, like, how much, like, emphasis and, like, how weird, like, it is to say it.
Yeah.
It's such a weird name, like Dobby, and like, it's weird.
But
Because, like, I mean, it could have been a lot. I don't know.
I think there's a lot of things in these 2 movies that they do pretty well. I think there is some plot points that they do very well, and it looks very nice. But there's also a lot of things that, like, because of how they set up 6 into this movies, that they can't do as well, because like, they don't have the knowledge, so like, they had to like rework a lot of things, and it just ended up not being very good because they had an audience that was like, was pretty ill-informed. If you hadn't read the books, like, they did not know enough about the intricacies of everything that was happening, that it ended up not translating well. And especially, like, the thing I hate is at the end of part 2, when Voldemort turns into ashes or whatever. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen in the book. They just did that.
I think one of the things I skipped to the end. I think one of the things that what they did is they literally took his body and threw it down some stairs into, like, a dungeon. I think that's what they did.
Yeah, but so like, they just did that literally because, like, oh, it'll look cool if he turns into ashes. So like, a lot of these things.
I mean,
I kind of
understand that, though, to an extent, because like, his soul isn't like like complete anymore, that he's like
Yeah.
this. They always gave this feeling that he's now this otherworldly thing that's just he's in a flesh body, but
Moving.
he's like this otherworldly thing. So it would make sense that like because he's not whole and complete anymore, that all of him gets destroyed. That yeah, he turns into ash and goes away because he's now this magical mortal being that's not really alive,
Yeah.
not meant to be alive. So I mean, in terms of like
And
what makes
also
that makes sense to me.
another terrible thing another thing that they do terribly in this movie is explain the Deathly Hollows, what they are. Like they do it okay, but also they don't explain a lot of like, because there's this huge thing in the seventh book where we get a lot of Dumbledore's past. We also learn about Aberforth, right?
Yeah,
What?
Everforth.
Aberforth, yeah, and then also his sister, and her name starts with an A too. I can't remember what it was. But
Yeah,
there
I
you get
can't remember either.
we get this like 200-page backstory on Dumbledore and Grindelwald, and we get a lot of exposition, and you find out that Dumbledore used to be not a good guy. He was very dark, and he was responsible for killing his sister, and him and Aberforth are not.
Ariana, was it
Yeah,
Ariana?
Ariana. I think it's Ariana. Yeah, he kills Ariana in a battle with Aberforth because he's trying to collect the Deathly Hollows to become the most powerful wizard, and he is evil. And
Yeah,
there's
and
so much of the
Aberforth
stuff.
is basically just trying to stop him, and apparently,
Mhm.
like he's like trying to like get him away from Grindelwald because
Yeah,
Dumbledore
and then
has like
a spell
has a
deflects,
yeah, because he has like this homosexual relationship with Grindelwald,
which isn't explained in the books, but J.K. Rowling comes out later and says that yeah, these characters had a relationship over summer, and that wasn't actually in the books. That just came out later, and it does make sense because like they were supposed to be like really good friends, like very very close, and almost to an intimate point. So it ended up making sense when she said that. Um, but yeah, so she gets killed in a deflected spell, and like in the movie, they're just like, Aberforth's like, yeah, I don't like him. He killed my sister, and that was like the whole thing they did for like all of that. And I was like, are you kidding me? There was like a lot of stuff happened, and your whole
and
summation of that was 2 lines.
yeah, and one of the things I didn't like about that is that like yeah, I'm Dumbledore's brother. I've literally lived inside this town for like you've been here all your life, like living like up in Hogwarts. Yeah, I've been down here. Yeah,
Just
yeah,
chilling.
yeah. You know this bar that you come to all the time? Yeah, I own it. Yeah, I live here. Yeah, I'm
Also,
that weird. I'm that guy that sits in the corner in the back all the time, and literally nobody. Yeah, yeah. Dumbledore's my brother.
yeah, I'm also like a really powerful wizard. But so like, there's a lot of these things where like they because of the way they explained Horcruxes and stuff, and also I don't know, it's just like they couldn't explain everything. I did like they had the Beetle and the Bard story, which is very cool, which is how like the three hollows were made.
I
And
think overall,
I
like
think Luna loves Good Dad. I can't think of his name, but that
Xenophilius, Xeno
yeah,
something.
yeah, I think that was well done because he was very sort of weird and fanatical. But like, there's also a lot of
Luna,
things where just like
Luna is easily one of my favorite characters in the entire movies. I always
she's
really
very well
enjoyed her
done. Yeah.
character. I never really understood the whole Harry and what's her name? God damn it, Ginny. I mean,
Ginny.
for me, that didn't really connect all that well. I honestly I see Harry with Luna a lot more than didn't Luna end up with Neville? Or who
Yeah,
did Luna
kind
end up
of.
with?
Like they, I mean, yeah, kind of. Like they were hinting at it. Um, and then Rupert Grint and Emma Watson, which does make sense, although it was never
That
really like
I agree. I agree
it
with
was
that one.
never really like that was never really addressed like outwardly in the book. Like you found out they ended up being together in like the after like because there's a like a 20-page like after Deathly Hollow ends there's a little 20-page blurb that they show in the movie of them when they're all grown up, and then Rupert Grint and Emma Watson are together, or Ron and Ron and Hermione are together, but they never really say that in the books. But they just took it upon themselves to be like, yeah, they make out in the Chamber of Secrets, like they just did that, and I think it's fine.
For me that makes sense. Like there are some things that they do in the movies where it does kind of make more sense than what I've read happens in the books, and like yeah, that makes sense. Not the majority of the things, but some of them, yeah. And it also makes sense for the movie itself. It's just like yeah, like you have these characters like they're hanging out, they're holding hands all the time, and like but no,
I think
they're literally
like
just really good
I
friends.
didn't like Voldemort's death just because it wasn't how it happened in the book, but I think like cinematically, and I think it looked really cool, and I think it was probably a better ending in a movie setting. Like it
Mhm.
was very like it was a good climax, and I thought it looked very well. But I was upset, like, because that didn't happen in the movie, and I was like being a douche about it. But
Yeah, and getting back to Deathly Hallows Part 1 real quick, because I have to address a few things. Like I said, I feel that this movie's, again, another bland one. Like, a lot happens in this movie, and they don't explain that much, and there's not that much exposition given. So throughout a lot of the movie, it's just like, it's literally like a lot of action and no words, but like the action isn't like, oh, meaningful action. No, they're walking in that grass over there for like 15 minutes, and no, they're like hanging out in that tent and dancing. It's like it's intimate moments and whatever, and like it's really cool, and like they're hanging out and being chill because they're on the run, but like they're not actually doing anything, and this movie doesn't actually matter at all because it doesn't actually give anything.
Yeah, the whole movie is just them hunting Horcruxes, and that's about it. And
like
sort
literally
of
not even Horcruxes. Like we're hunting down this one. Like we have like this one that's like a locket. Like throughout like an hour of the movie, we're trying to figure out how to destroy it. Like we don't actually end up going anywhere. Like we actually don't end up figuring out how to do it. Like literally a character that's been gone throughout an hour of the movie just shows up randomly, and he already
destroyed it. You already destroyed
it.
Actually, like an hour of the movie is them trying to figure out how to open the locket, and then once they open it, it's just like Aberforth left a message. He's just like, "Yeah, I destroyed that shit already," and that was the big climax of that whole locket scene. So, the seventh movie, or like 7 part 1, is just like I don't know, but I think the interesting thing is that Order of the Phoenix had $150 million budget. Half-Blood Prince had a $250 million budget, so they really ramped it up. And then Part 2 and Part 1 had a shared budget of $250 million. So they shot the last two on a lot smaller budget than they did in Order of the Phoenix or Half-Blood Prince. And so maybe they got a little bit better with what they were doing because they didn't have as big of a budget because they had to shoot 2 movies on the budget of what they just shot with.
Yeah, but like if you still think about that, like Deathly Hallows Part 1 is such a useless movie. It doesn't actually progress anything. Like literally you can take like 30 minutes or an hour out of that movie, and then probably about 20-30 minutes out of Part 2, and then just put them together in one movie. Sure, it would have been longer than usual.
That's the point. That's the point that I was making. That's the point I was making, is that there's no reason for it to be 2 parts. It was just a cash grab. They just wanted to make what they had
in the 2 movies. There was no point in making them 2 movies. In terms of the material that they could have pulled from the books, that would have been better for 2 movies.
It could have been,
yeah. It could have made sense for 2 movies.
Well, like I would have loved to have seen a whole sequence in the Part 1 where they show Grindelwald, and then they show Dumbledore, they show Aberforth, they show Ariana, even a flashback.
It's stylistic choices that David Yates took, and it was so bizarre and so stupid, especially when there were so many questions that were brought up and so many things they could have shown, and they literally didn't. And they showed like 15-20 minutes of the movie were like dedicated to them just sitting around doing nothing, or like 30 or 40 minutes, and it's like annoying because you're like, dude, do something. Like talk about the Horcruxes or the Deathly Hallows or Dumbledore, because like
he was way more focused. Like the issue with him was that David Yates decided to focus way more on the relationships between Ron, Hermione, and Harry, and not the ones with not the more important ones. He wanted to focus on because in the first one, like Ron gets all pissed at Harry and runs away, and then he comes back, and so he was way more focused on that triangle than the rest of it. Yeah, they didn't need to. There's no reason to do it. Yeah.
Throughout 6 movies, they've already gone through so much development and dynamics and heartbreak and all that. You didn't need to focus on their story that much anymore. You just needed to focus on
their adventure,
on their adventure and the meaning behind these other characters, because there's still so much. If you take a look at all 8 of these movies and watch them back to back, there's still not that much satisfaction given in some of the storylines and in characters that you want to know more about,
very much,
especially like Sirius Black or like Remus Lupin or Snape, for instance, or Dumbledore or Grindelwald. Because these characters brushed over literally in these last.
And it's a disservice because we find out oh yeah, remember the cloak that you got in year 1. Yeah, that's actually one of the Deathly Hallows. And remember the Golden Snitch? Yeah, that's a Deathly Hallow. And then the other one, yeah, Dumbledore had that. And so they have all these things that have been in the story for so long, but then the payoff is so minimal.
And that's the thing that annoys me about this movie is these movies are called Deathly Hallows. How much of this story actually did the Deathly Hallows actually take up?
10 minutes.
Yeah, literally nothing in this movie. It's called Deathly Hallows for no reason. It should have been called Adventures for the Horcruxes or something like that.
But half of the book is actually about the Deathly Hallows and how they're there's so much about them, and the history behind it and everything. And it was just
Yeah.
David Yates not really, I don't know. He was just
Hmm.
I don't know. David Yates
And,
is weird guy.
and Mitch, what would you give Deathly Hallows Part 1 out of 10?
Part 1, I think it's the worst, but I would say 8 out of 10 because I still like it. And then part 2, probably 8.5 or 9 out of 10 because I think that although part 1 is bad, I think part 2 does a good job of resolving the story, and
I give
I
it
think
a
it's pretty good climactically.
I give it a 7 or a 7.5 out of 10. It's very disappointing for a lot of it, but it's not like it's not the worst one in my opinion. Like Half
I
Blood
do
Prince,
like
I think I gave Half Blood Prince like a 7 or 7.5. I think it's just a little bit better than that,
I
but
enjoy
not
how
much better.
I enjoy how part 2 a lot of the characters step out. Like we see Mrs. Weasley steps out, becomes a badass. Neville Longbottom finally, becomes, full circle, and he's sort of pretty pivotal. And like I think a lot of these characters, like they kind of step into the shoes that they should eventually, but
Hmm.
a lot of like the story behind everything that's going on is sort of like not explained to the extent, and it really pisses me off because like even in part 1 they could have done a 5-minute flashback of like even what happened to Ariana, and they could have like in 5 minutes they could have just showed like a glimpse of Grindelwald and Dumbledore and Aberforth fighting, and then she dies. They could have at least done that, but they didn't even do that. They're like, yeah, my brother sucks and he killed her. I was like, sick dude. Way to
Yeah,
really like way to explain that well. Like that was a good job.
yeah.
So
Essentially, like Deathly Hallows Part 2. A lot of this movie is like is a lot of like conclusion. It's a lot of payoff. This movie is like essentially what this movie is Harry Potter's and the movie about payoff. Like that's a lot of what this movie is. It's a lot of conclusion. You actually learn a little bit more. I feel like this movie is much more satisfying and what it gives you in terms of story. Like it felt like more back to those roots. It's one of the better ones in to an extent, but I mean there are some flaws there. But there's a lot of really good payoff in this movie.
mhm.
So yeah, I
and
have to.
and
Uh,
this 2-part movie series, it had a shared $250 million budget, and it made about 2.4 billion.
mhm.
So I mean, these were some of the biggest movies. And I guess if we really want to talk about it, it's $1.3 million budget overall, made 8 billion. Um, I think that Half Blood Prince made the least,
Yeah,
or it might have been Order of the Phoenix. One of those two made the least, but like even for this movie, the smallest amount that was made was like 860 million. So like each movie made a billion or close to it. So I mean, like these movies are insane. Um,
yeah.
and do I think they deserve it? That's a really hard question for me. Um,
I'd say that yeah, they deserve them. Not Half Blood Prince and Half Blood Prince and Deathly Hollows. I mean, Half Blood Prince for me is probably like a $400 million movie. Same thing with Deathly Hollows Part 1. They're both for me around the 300 to $400 million range of how much they actually deserve. I mean, they don't
yeah.
deserve that much
So
attention because like yeah, they're pretty good throughout them, but in terms of like actually good movie, there's not a lot there. I mean, it's a
the
lot
half,
of like
yeah,
questions that weren't answered and very bland and a
the
lot of nothing going on, a lot of filler.
the Prisoner of the Azkaban made the least. It made
Mhm.
800 million. So like when I look at it and I say, do they deserve it? I think that yes, they deserve it, but I think the reason why it did what it did was because they planned it so well and they rolled it out at exactly the right time. I think that like if this movie hadn't come out in 2001, if it came out like a year or two later, I don't think it would be what it is today because I think they just planned it so right and they hit that wave of like Harry Potter fandom and like its explosion into the mainstream at just the right time. Then they just rode that wave, like I said, all the way out. And I think
Mhm.
that if they would have released like the first one in like 2004 or 2003, like a couple years later, I don't think it would have been what it was today. I don't think they would have made nearly as much money. And I think they just timed it so perfectly that like regardless of what they did, they were just gonna ride out the Harry Potter wave because like the books are coming out and then the movies for them were coming out like so like the movies and the books came out almost at the same time. Like the series, like I think the seventh book came out right when like the fifth movie came out. I think that was about it. So like
Yeah.
it was like they're almost in tandem. So like it was just Harry Potter like fandom and like it was like exploding and it was all people were talking about for years. So like it was perfect how they did it because like they just rode that wave out and they just made insane amount of money and just
Mhm.
like crazy money.
Mhm. I mean, yeah, I mean that is the case. So, Mitch, what would you give Seven Part Two?
Seven part two. I
Yeah.
think it's for me. It's probably like 8.5 out of 10, maybe even a 9. I think it does. I feel it feels resolved for me when it's done. I
Mhm.
enjoy it.
I give it a 9.
Uh,
I give it an 8.5 or a 9. Yeah, I feel comfortable around there because, like I said, it is payoff. But it does go back to those roots that I did kind of like about like Harry Potter's more mature storytelling. Is that like yeah, there was a lot of payoff and there was a lot of emotion, and characters started becoming much more lively, and they felt like they were at that point where they needed to be, and it hit those dark moments. But it hit those dark moments in like it was like what was it what's it called, cause and effect. It's like here's the cause and here's the effect, and it all made sense, and it made sense so perfectly, and for me it was a lot of good payoff. So for me, yeah, it's a
Yeah,
9.
I remember when I saw it because I saw it when it released at midnight, the part two, and I felt sort of like sad when I came out just because it was over, and it felt very resolved for me when I saw it. And I could have just been in the moment, but like, a lot of people were sad when they left just because like it was over, and they're like, "Oh no, Harry Potter's done. We're not gonna get any more of it." But I think that it has stood up well, as it's aged, and I think
Mhm,
that part one and Half Blood Prince haven't, but I think part two has held up pretty well,
mhm.
considering what it had to overcome with those two movies.
Mhm. I mean,
Because like
easily.
this is the big pinnacle moment, and I think like the fighting sequences are cool, and I think there's a lot of cool stuff that happens. um I think the one weird thing is when he dies and he goes to sees Dumbledore, and it's all white, and then you see some sort of like demented form of Voldemort underneath a bench. It looks like some sort of like, I don't
Aborted
even know,
fetus,
like it's
like
some
an
sort of
aborted
aborted
fetus.
fetus. Yeah. um but so like that was the one weirdest part for that movie for me. I was like, what? But like it's also very like interesting to watch because it's all white, and like it's the whitest thing I've ever seen in a movie. Like when they flash to that, like it's pure white in the screen. And you're like, Jesus, because it's been so dark the whole time, and then it's just like this explosion of white. So it's really interesting to watch.
Mhm,
But I think that these series does deserve the money, and I think it was just planned so well, and
mhm.
it was executed for the most part pretty well.
I think overall, yeah, the series deserves the money. There are a few instances in the movies, in the franchise where I feel like no, like they could have made a lot less and would have been a lot more deserving. But yeah, I definitely I like the series. I think it's one of the best film franchises of all time. I mean, there's a couple stinkers in there, but like they're not like bad stinkers. They're just like yeah, they're
Could
that
have been
one
better.
friend that they're like that one friend that yeah, they're a little annoying, they're a little uneventful, but like you love them. They're still like good people. They're still good to hang out with every once in a while. But like, no. But yeah, it's a very good film franchise. So anyway, thank you guys for watching, and don't forget to check out Unfiltered Podcast. Again, that series or that season 1 of Unfiltered Podcast ends on January 25th. Be checking that out. You still have time to come and join us before we end off the season. We have our Film Facts podcast, which is starting out on March 29th. We have our short film coming out sometime later in 2017. And Eyes of the Imaginators is a 3-part web series that we are working on talking about behind the scenes of filmmaking and what it means to be a filmmaker and an audience member and the meaning behind movies. That's going to be coming out in early 2017, along with the return of our video game podcast being hosted by Eugene Smith. We're really excited about
Yeah,
that one.
Eugene
Yeah.
Eugene over at Ace Tech HD. He's in our sub box if you want to check that out. He has got a lot of great videos. If you like Nintendo, check out his videos because he is
Mhm.
probably the biggest Nintendo fan I know.
Yeah, and be sharing these videos around. We love to talk about movies. Film Facts podcast, again, like I said, comes out on March 29th. But we are doing actually a special preseason episode on February 26th, I believe. It's going to be a live stream event going along with the Academy Awards. So be waiting. We're going to be reminding people about that one. That's going to be happening on February 5th. Unfiltered is going to also return during the end of season break for a special live stream episode for the Super Bowl. So it's going to be reactions, and we're going to be talking about the trailers and the commercials that go on between then. And we're going to be talking about sports. So that's going to be done with the Unfiltered crew. We might have a guest, we might not. We don't know. But Al, Mitch, and I, and maybe one other person are going to be doing one for the Academy Awards, which is what I'm really excited about.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's gonna be awesome.
yeah, and don't forget to subscribe and comment on these videos. Follow us on all of our social media. If you go and follow us on our Twitter, we have a lot of different polls going on all the time. We want you guys to be involved in those polls because we answer all the different questions that get brought up on them on Unfiltered, and it's a lot of fun. We love to get to know you guys a little bit better. We love to be more involved and interact with you guys. So comment and share this video. Man, share this video around. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.
Thanks, guys.